Texas, 1875. The merciless summer sun beat down on Quentin Grayson's weathered shoulders as he guided his horse across the drought-stricken range. At 26, he'd already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship on the unforgiving frontier. The small ranch he'd built with his bare hands sat on the horizon, a humble testament to his stubborn determination. But today, like most days since his wife Sarah's passing 2 years ago, the sight of it filled him with a hollow ache rather than pride. "You ready to get home, Daisy?" he asked the 6-year-old daughter perched in front of him on the saddle. Her small hands clutched the horn. Her dark hair, so like her mother's, had escaped her braids during their ride into town. "Yes, Papa," she answered, her voice small but steady. Quentin knew Sarah would have wanted him to find love again, to give Daisy a mother's touch that his calloused hands couldn't provide. But he'd come to believe that the frontier was no place for lasting happiness. The land took more than it gave, and loving someone only meant giving fate another weapon to wound you with. Better to focus on survival, on raising his daughter to be strong and independent in a world that showed no mercy. He guided his horse toward home, the summer sun casting long shadows across the plains. The ranch wasn't much, a modest cabin, small barn, and 30 acres with a shallow creek running through it. But it was theirs. They'd make do, just the two of them. Love was a luxury cowboys like him couldn't afford, not when each day demanded every ounce of strength just to survive. 2 weeks later, the stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Willow Creek's only hotel, sending a cloud of dust billowing across the main street. Penelope Zimmerman, 22 years old with golden blonde hair arranged in a neat chignon beneath her modest traveling hat, peered out the window with a mixture of trepidation and relief. After 3 days of brutal travel from Denver, even this dusty frontier town looked like paradise. "Welcome to Willow Creek, miss," the driver called down as he secured the brake. End of the line. Penelope gathered her valise and stepped carefully down onto Texas soil for the first time. Her pale blue traveling dress, though wrinkled from the journey, still maintained a certain Eastern refinement that immediately marked her as an outsider. She'd come west to assume her position as the town's new schoolteacher, her teaching certificate and stellar references from Boston's finest academy securing her the post. "Miss Zimmerman?" A portly man with a friendly face approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Walter Jenkins, mayor of Willow Creek. We're mighty pleased you've arrived safely." "Thank you for meeting me," she replied, offering a gloved hand. "I'm eager to begin preparations for the school year." What Penelope didn't say was that teaching in this remote town represented her last chance at independence. After her father's financial ruin and subsequent death, she'd been left with nothing but her education and a desperate need to escape the pity of Boston society. The frontier offered something Boston couldn't, a fresh start where nobody knew her story. "School's just down the way," Jenkins explained as they walked. "Living quarters attached to the back. It's simple, but should suit a young lady like yourself just fine." Penelope nodded, but anxiety flickered within her. The truth she'd carried west like an unwanted piece of luggage was this: she believed herself fundamentally unworthy of love or belonging. Her fiancé had abandoned her the moment her father's fortune disappeared, and her so-called friends had swiftly followed. She'd learned the painful lesson that affection was merely a transaction, easily withdrawn when circumstances changed. The frontier might be harsh, but it couldn't possibly be crueler than the drawing rooms of Boston society. The schoolhouse was indeed modest, a single room with rows of rough-hewn benches, a blackboard, and a small stove. The attached living quarters consisted of a bedroom, tiny kitchen, and sitting area. But to Penelope, it represented freedom. "Term starts in 3 weeks, Mayor Jenkins explained. Gives you time to settle in and meet the families. 17 children enrolled this year, ages 6 to 15. Penelope's practiced smile hid her nervousness. "I look forward to meeting them all." The bell above Thornton's general store jingled as Quentin pushed open the door, Daisy's small hand tucked in his. August heat followed them inside, barely mitigated by the shade of the shop's interior. "Morning, Mr. Thornton," Quentin greeted, nodding to the shopkeeper. "Quentin, Daisy," the older man acknowledged. "What can I help you with today?" "School supplies," Quentin answered, looking down at his daughter. "Daisy starts school next month." Mr. Thornton smiled warmly at the child. "Well now, that's exciting. As it happens, Our new schoolteacher arrived yesterday. Quite a refined young lady from back east. That's so, Quentin replied without much interest. Town gossip held little importance compared to the cattle prices that had dropped again or the well that needed deepening before the creek ran dry. Miss Zimmerman's her name. Educated in Boston. Mayor says she comes highly recommended. Quentin merely nodded, turning his attention to the small display of pencils and paper tablets. We'll need one of these, and a crash from the front of the store interrupted him. He turned to see Daisy standing before a fallen display of canned goods, her small face crumpling with dismay. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Before Quentin could react, a young woman he didn't recognize knelt beside his daughter. She wore a simple yellow dress that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, her blonde hair neatly pinned back. No harm done, she said gently, already gathering the cans. These displays are terribly unstable. I nearly knocked one over myself yesterday. Daisy sniffled, cautiously helping to retrieve a can that had rolled away. The woman smiled at her. What's your name? Daisy Grayson, ma'am. Well, Daisy Grayson, I'm Miss Zimmerman. I'll be your teacher when school begins. Quentin stepped forward, an unexpected tightness in his chest at the sight of this stranger being kind to his daughter. I apologize for the trouble. We'll pay for any damage. The young woman looked up, and Quentin was struck by the clarity of her green eyes. There's no damage at all, Mr. Grayson. Just a bit of excitement to break up the morning. She rose gracefully, extending a gloved hand. Penelope Zimmerman. Quentin, he replied, briefly taking her hand. And you've met Daisy. Something in Miss Zimmerman's gentle demeanor with his daughter stirred an emotion he couldn't quite place. Gratitude mixed with an uncomfortable awareness that Daisy needed more than what he alone could provide. Are you getting school supplies? Miss Zimmerman asked Daisy. The girl nodded, suddenly shy. Would you like me to help you choose? I know exactly what we'll need for our lessons. Before Quentin could object, Miss Zimmerman was guiding Daisy through the selection of pencils and a primer, talking about the exciting books they would read together. He watched, unsettled by how naturally Daisy responded to this stranger, how quickly she smiled in a way he rarely saw anymore. When they finished their shopping and stepped back into the blazing Texas sun, Daisy clutched her paper-wrapped school supplies to her chest like precious treasure. Miss Zimmerman is nice, Papa, she declared as they mounted his horse. Seems so, he agreed noncommittally. Do you think she'll like teaching me? Any teacher would be lucky to have you in their classroom. He answered automatically, but his mind lingered on the schoolteacher's kind smile and the way it had momentarily brightened his daughter's world. And perhaps, though he'd never admit it, his own. Penelope wiped sweat from her brow as she arranged the desks in neat rows. August heat turned the schoolhouse into a furnace despite the open windows. 2 weeks had passed since her arrival, and she'd spent every day preparing, organizing books, planning lessons, and meeting the families of her future students. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. Through the open doorway came Daisy Grayson, followed by her father. Penelope couldn't help the smile that formed at the sight of the child, or the flutter of awareness at the sight of Quentin. Miss Zimmerman, Daisy called, rushing forward. Papa said we could bring you these. In her small hands was a basket containing fresh eggs and what appeared to be homemade bread. Daisy insisted. Quentin explained, his hat in his hands. Town tradition to welcome new folks. How thoughtful, Penelope replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. Would you like to see what I've done with the schoolroom, Daisy? You'll be sitting right here in the second row. As Daisy explored the classroom, Penelope became acutely aware of Quentin watching her. Unlike most men she'd encountered, his gaze held no calculation or judgment, just a quiet assessment that somehow made her more nervous than any scrutiny she'd faced in Boston. The school looks well prepared, he commented. Folks in town say you've been working dawn to dusk getting ready. There's much to do, she admitted, but it's rewarding work. Daisy's been counting the days. She loved learning her letters from her mother, but he stopped abruptly, as though he'd said more than intended. Penelope filled the silence. She seems a bright child. Very eager. Too eager sometimes, he said with a hint of a smile that transformed his serious face. Asks questions faster than I can answer them. The best kind of student, Penelope replied, watching as Daisy carefully examined the world map she'd hung on the wall. Mr. Grayson, a crash of thunder interrupted her, followed immediately by the sudden drumming of rain on the schoolhouse roof. "Storm's here early," Quentin observed, moving to the window. "They blow up fast this time of year." The sky had darkened dramatically in the few minutes they'd been inside, and rain now poured in sheets, turning the street to mud within moments. "Oh dear," Penelope murmured. "I hope it passes quickly." "Not likely," Quentin said, frowning. "These summer storms can last hours. We should wait it out." The unexpected "we" hung in the air between them. Penelope busied herself lighting the oil lamps as the storm darkened the room, aware of Quentin's presence in a way that made her both nervous and strangely comforted. "Perhaps Daisy would like to see the books we'll be reading," she suggested, grateful for the child's presence as chaperone. As the storm raged outside, they spent an unexpected hour together. Penelope showed Daisy the primer they would use, reading stories that made the girl laugh. Quentin sat nearby, occasionally contributing to their conversation, but mostly watching his daughter's animation with something like wonder. When Penelope handed Daisy a piece of chalk and showed her how to write her name on the blackboard, the girl's face lit with accomplishment. "Papa, look," she exclaimed, pointing to her wobbly but legible letters. "Well done, honey," he said warmly. Then, to Penelope, her mother would be proud to see this. The simple statement revealed more than perhaps he intended: the absence in their lives, the efforts of a father trying to fill roles he hadn't been prepared for. When the rain finally slackened, Penelope walked them to the door, suddenly reluctant to see them leave. "Thank you for the gifts," she said, "and the company during the storm." Daisy looked up at her with serious eyes. "Will you teach me to write more words when school starts, Miss Zimmerman?" "As many as you want to learn," Penelope promised. As they prepared to brave the muddy street, Daisy turned back suddenly. "Papa says Mama is watching me from heaven. Do you think she sees me writing my name?" The innocent question hung in the air. Penelope looked to Quentin, whose face had tightened with emotion. "I believe," Penelope said carefully, kneeling to meet Daisy's eyes, "that mothers always see the wonderful things their children do, whether they're beside them or watching from above." Daisy nodded, satisfied with this answer, but Penelope caught the look in Quentin's eyes, a flash of gratitude that made her heart turn over unexpectedly. Long after they'd gone, she found herself thinking of that moment, and of the lonely cowboy raising his daughter with such devoted care. The first day of school arrived with merciless Texas heat still gripping the land. Quentin watched Daisy smooth her dress for the 10th time that morning, her excitement palpable as she clutched her new lunch pail. "You look pretty as a picture," he assured her, adjusting her hair ribbon. "Ready to go?" "Yes," she exclaimed, practically bouncing with anticipation. They rode into town together, Daisy chattering the entire way about Miss Zimmerman and all the things she hoped to learn. Quentin couldn't help but notice how his daughter had blossomed in the past weeks, her natural curiosity rekindled by the prospect of school. The schoolyard was filled with children and parents when they arrived. Miss Zimmerman stood by the door in a crisp blue dress, welcoming each child with a warm smile. When she spotted Daisy, her face brightened in a way that made something shift in Quentin's chest. "Good morning, Daisy," she greeted. "Are you ready for your first day?" Daisy nodded enthusiastically, suddenly shy in the presence of the other children. "She's been ready since sunrise," Quentin explained. "Hardly slept a wink." Miss Zimmerman laughed, the sound light and pleasant in the morning air. "The best students always are eager. She'll do wonderfully, Mr. Grayson." Their eyes met briefly, and Quentin found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before: the tiny freckles across her nose, the way her blonde hair caught golden highlights in the sun, the genuine warmth in her expression as she spoke to his daughter. "I'll pick her up at 3, he said, feeling suddenly awkward under her gaze. Daisy hugged him quickly before hurrying inside, already forgotten in her excitement for school. Quentin lingered a moment longer than necessary, watching as Miss Zimmerman rang the bell to summon the stragglers. As he rode back to his ranch, he found his thoughts returning to the schoolteacher more often than he cared to admit. There was something about her that disrupted the careful walls he'd built around himself and Daisy after Sarah's death. Something that made him wonder if his belief that the frontier allowed no room for happiness beyond mere survival might be wrong. But such thoughts were dangerous. Better to focus on the practicalities of ranch life: the fence that needed mending, the cattle that needed moving to better grazing land, than to indulge in foolish daydreams about a refined Eastern lady who likely saw him as nothing more than another rough cowboy. By late September, Penelope had settled into life in Willow Creek. Her days followed a pleasant rhythm, teaching from 8 until 3, preparing lessons in the evenings, and gradually becoming part of the small community that had welcomed her so warmly. Her students had proven eager to learn, particularly Daisy Grayson, whose bright mind and endless questions were a teacher's delight. And if Penelope found herself looking forward to the moments when Quentin arrived to collect his daughter each afternoon, she refused to examine those feelings too closely. One Friday afternoon, as the children filed out, Daisy lingered behind, nervously twisting her hands in her skirt. "Is everything all right, Daisy?" Penelope asked, concerned by the child's unusual hesitation. "Miss Zimmerman, will you come to supper at our ranch tomorrow?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "Papa said I could invite you, and I already asked Mrs. Thompson to drive you out since Papa will be busy getting everything ready. And she said yes because she's delivering eggs to the Miller farm anyway." And, "Slow down." Penelope laughed, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. "Did your father really say you could invite me?" Daisy nodded vigorously. "He said it was proper to thank you because I'm learning so much." Something in the girl's expression, a mixture of hope and determination, made Penelope suspect there was more to the invitation than simple gratitude. "I would be delighted to come," she said warmly. "What time should I be ready?" 4 o'clock. "Papa's making his special stew, and I'm helping with the biscuits." And the door opened, and Quentin himself appeared, his tall frame filling the doorway. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd decided to live at school." His eyes met Penelope's, and she felt a now familiar flutter in her chest. "Papa," I asked her, and she said yes. Daisy announced triumphantly. A flash of something, surprise, alarm, crossed Quentin's face before he composed himself. "Good," he said simply. "We'll look forward to it." As they left, Penelope wondered at the complexity of emotions she'd glimpsed in his expression. Had Daisy's invitation been entirely her own idea? The thought that Quentin might not actually want her company stung more than it should have. Saturday afternoon found Penelope nervously smoothing her best dress, a simple but flattering gown of sage green that complemented her blonde hair and fair complexion. She'd accepted Mrs. Thompson's offer of transportation without fully considering the implications of visiting a single man's home, even with his daughter as chaperone. The frontier had different social codes than Boston, but she still worried about propriety. Mrs. Thompson, a cheerful widow in her 50s, dismissed her concerns as they drove. "Nonsense, dear. Everyone knows you're the schoolteacher, and that Daisy adores you. Besides, that man has been alone too long. Does that child good to have a woman's influence now and again." The Grayson Ranch appeared on the horizon, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, surrounded by rolling grassland. Quentin stood waiting by the gate, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from washing. The sight of him, not in his usual dusty riding clothes, but in a proper shirt with his sleeves rolled up, made Penelope's heart beat a little faster. "Welcome to our home," he said, helping her down from the wagon with strong, careful hands. "Thank you for having me," she replied, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. Daisy burst from the house, running to greet her. "Miss Zimmerman, come see. I helped Papa clean everything." The cabin was indeed spotless, its simple furnishings polished to a shine. A cooking fire burned in the stone hearth, filling the room with savory aromas. Penelope noticed small touches that spoke of the effort they'd made. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, the best dishes set out, a fresh checkered tablecloth. "Your home is lovely," she said sincerely. "It's not much," Quentin replied, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "But it's ours." Throughout the meal, Penelope watched the interaction between father and daughter with growing warmth. Quentin was different here, more relaxed, quick to smile at Daisy's chatter, openly proud of her achievements at school. The reserved cowboy she'd come to know in town transformed in his own home into a devoted father whose world clearly revolved around his child. After supper, Daisy insisted on showing Penelope her room, proudly displaying the small bookshelf Quentin had built for her new school books. "Papa reads to me every night," she explained, "but now sometimes I can read to him instead." "That must make him very proud," Penelope observed. Daisy's expression suddenly turned serious. "Do you like my papa, Miss Zimmerman?" The question caught Penelope off guard. Of course I do. Your father is a good man. Mama's been gone a long time, Daisy continued, her small face earnest. Papa gets lonely, even though he doesn't say so. Understanding dawned on Penelope, and with it, a flutter of panic. The child's invitation hadn't been merely about thanking a teacher. Daisy was matchmaking. Sweetheart, she began gently. Your father and I, Daisy? Quentin's voice called from outside. Come help me gather eggs for Miss Zimmerman to take home. Saved from having to respond, Penelope followed Daisy outside, her mind whirling. The golden light of late afternoon bathed the ranch in a warm glow as Quentin showed her around, pointing out the vegetable garden he'd planted, the new section of fence he'd recently completed. You've built something wonderful here, she said as they paused by the corral. It's a work in progress, he replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. Harder without. He stopped, then continued more carefully. Daisy deserves a good home. She has one, Penelope assured him. Anyone can see how much you love her. A shadow passed over his face. Sometimes love isn't enough. A child needs more than I can give alone. The frank admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Before Penelope could respond, Daisy called from the chicken coop, breaking the moment. As sunset approached, Quentin hitched his wagon to drive Penelope back to town. Daisy, exhausted from excitement, fell asleep against her father's shoulder within minutes of starting their journey. They rode in companionable silence, the creaking of the wagon and the rhythm of hooves the only sounds. Penelope stole glances at Quentin's profile, struck by how natural it felt to be beside him, how comfortable this silence was compared to the calculated conversations she'd endured in Boston drawing rooms. Thank you for coming today, he said finally, his voice low not to wake Daisy. It meant a lot to her. It meant a lot to me as well. Penelope replied honestly. You have a beautiful home. Sarah, my wife, she always said a home isn't about the building, but the life inside it. He spoke carefully, as if testing whether he could speak of his wife without pain. She would have liked you. The simple statement touched Penelope deeply. I wish I could have known her. She was like you in some ways. Kind, patient with Daisy, saw beauty where others might not. When they reached town, he insisted on escorting her to her door despite her protests that she could manage. With Daisy still sleeping in the wagon, he walked Penelope to the schoolhouse entrance. Will we see you at church tomorrow? She asked, reluctant for the evening to end. We'll be there, he promised. Then, with a hint of his earlier hesitation, Daisy would be pleased if you'd join us for Sunday dinner after. Mrs. Miller and her family will be there too. The addition of the Miller family, a respectable farming couple with 3 children, made the invitation perfectly proper, but Penelope sensed it represented something more significant than simple hospitality. I'd be honored, she replied, her heart quickening at the smile that crossed his face. As his wagon disappeared down the darkening street, Penelope realized with sudden clarity that her carefully constructed beliefs about her unworthiness were being challenged by this frontier family. Here, unlike in Boston, her value seemed measured not by her father's fortune or social standing, but by her kindness to a motherless child and her willingness to brave the hardships of frontier life. It was a dangerous realization, one that threatened the protective walls she'd built around her heart. But as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. October brought cooler weather and golden light that transformed the Texas landscape. For Quentin, it also brought an unsettling awareness that his carefully ordered life was shifting in ways he hadn't anticipated. Twice more, Penelope had joined them for Sunday dinner, along with various neighbors whose presence maintained propriety while doing nothing to diminish the growing connection between them. Their conversations had extended beyond Daisy's schoolwork to books they'd both read, their differing experiences of the world, and cautious sharing of their pasts. Today, he found himself riding toward town with no particular errand in mind, drawn by the possibility of seeing her. The harvest festival was approaching, and the town buzzed with preparations. He told himself he was merely checking on the community's progress, but in truth, he hoped to catch a glimpse of the schoolteacher who had begun to occupy his thoughts with alarming frequency. He found her outside the schoolhouse with her students, supervising as they hung paper decorations for the festival. She wore a simple brown dress with a white apron, her blonde hair escaping its pins as she reached up to help a small boy attach his creation to the eaves. Mr. Grayson, she called when she spotted him, a smile lighting her face. "Have you come to help with our decorations?" "Just passing through," he replied, dismounting nonetheless. "Looks like you have plenty of helpers." "Never enough when it comes to reaching high places," she countered, gesturing to the schoolhouse roof. "We're trying to hang this banner, but I'm afraid none of us can reach." Before he could think better of it, Quentin found himself climbing a ladder to attach the children's banner across the schoolhouse entrance. The delight on Daisy's face at seeing her father involved in the school activities was matched only by the warmth in Penelope's eyes as she thanked him. "Will you stay for lemonade?" she asked as the children cheered their completed decorations. The mothers sent refreshments for our hard workers. He stayed, watching as she interacted with each child, her natural grace and kindness evident in every gesture. When most of the children had been collected by their parents, she sat beside him on the schoolhouse steps, her skirts arranged carefully around her. "You're good with them," he observed. "The children. They make it easy," she replied. "They're eager to learn, to grow. Daisy talks of nothing but school these days. And her teacher." A slight blush colored Penelope's cheeks. "She's a special child. You've raised her well, especially under difficult circumstances." The mention of his circumstances, raising Daisy alone, hung between them. "It wasn't my plan," he admitted. "When Sarah died, I thought." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I believed the frontier was no place for happiness. That survival was the most I could hope for." Penelope's eyes held understanding beyond her years. "And now I wonder if I was wrong." The words came reluctantly, exposing a vulnerability he'd long denied. "Daisy deserves more than just surviving." "As do you," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and unspoken questions. But before either could speak further, the church bell rang the hour, breaking the spell. "I should return home," Quentin said, suddenly aware of how long they'd been talking. "Of course." Penelope rose, smoothing her skirts. "The festival committee meets tomorrow evening. Perhaps you'd consider attending? The committee needs someone to organize the horseback games." It was a perfectly reasonable request, yet they both recognized it as something more, an opportunity to see each other again, beyond the carefully chaperoned Sunday dinners. "I'll be there," he promised. As he rode home, Quentin confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. His belief that love had no place in his life was crumbling in the face of his growing feelings for Penelope. The fear remained, of loss, of pain, of failing both Daisy and the memory of Sarah, but alongside it grew something stronger, hope. The Harvest Festival arrived on a perfect autumn day, crisp air, cloudless sky, and the scent of baking pies floating across the town square. Penelope had been up since dawn, helping to organize the children's recitations that would open the festivities. The entire town had gathered, dressed in their Sunday best. Families spread blankets on the grass, farmers displayed their finest produce, and a small band of local musicians tuned their instruments near the wooden platform erected for dancing. Penelope spotted Quentin and Daisy the moment they arrived. Quentin wore a clean dark shirt and vest that emphasized his broad shoulders, while Daisy twirled in a new blue dress, her dark hair ribboned with matching blue. "Miss Zimmerman," Daisy called, breaking away from her father to run toward her teacher. "Do you like my new dress? Papa got it special for today." "You look absolutely beautiful," Penelope assured her, aware of Quentin approaching at a more measured pace. "As do you," he said quietly when he reached them. Penelope felt herself blush at the simple compliment. She'd chosen her best dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy that complemented her fair coloring, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "Thank you," she murmured. The children are about to begin their recitations. Daisy has the opening poem. The girl's face lit with excitement. "I practiced all week, Papa. Wait until you hear me." The festival unfolded like a dream around them. Daisy performed her poem flawlessly, beaming with pride as the crowd applauded. The children's games followed, sack races, apple bobbing, and a spelling contest that Daisy nearly won. Quentin stayed close to Penelope throughout, his presence both thrilling and comforting as they moved through the festivities together. "Time for the horseback games," Mayor Jenkins announced after lunch. "All riders to the south field. Are you competing?" Penelope asked Quentin. A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Seems like I should, since I organized them." "Then we'll cheer for you," she promised. "Won't we, Daisy?" The horseback competitions drew the entire town to the temporary arena set up in the field. Riders demonstrated their skills at barrel racing, roping, and finally, a test of precision where they had to spear small rings with a lance while at full gallop. Quentin, astride his bay gelding, moved with a natural grace that made the difficult tasks look effortless. When he completed the ring course with a perfect score, Penelope found herself cheering as loudly as Daisy. "Your father is quite skilled," she told the child, watching as Quentin collected his winner's ribbon. "He's the best rider in the whole county," Daisy declared proudly. "Mama used to say he could talk to horses better than people." The casual mention of Sarah no longer brought the cloud of sadness it once had. Instead, Penelope felt a curious kinship with the woman she'd never met. This person who had loved Quentin and Daisy, who remained a precious part of their lives even in absence. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, lanterns were lit around the square, and the band struck up a lively tune for dancing. "Dance with Papa," Daisy urged Penelope as couples began to take their places. "He knows how." Quentin looked momentarily alarmed, then resigned as his daughter's encouragement drew the attention of nearby townspeople. "Miss Zimmerman might prefer a different partner," he suggested. "Actually," Penelope said with newfound boldness, "I'd be honored to dance with you, Mr. Grayson." His eyes widened slightly before he offered his hand. "The honor would be mine." The dance was a simple country reel, with couples forming lines and circling each other in carefully choreographed patterns. Penelope was acutely aware of Quentin's hand when it took hers, of his steadying presence as they moved through the figures of the dance. Though they were surrounded by other couples, each moment their hands joined felt intimate, significant. "You dance well for a cowboy," she teased during a brief pause in the music. "Sarah insisted I learn," he admitted. "Said no husband of hers would stand on the sidelines while others had fun. A wise woman. She was." His expression softened. "She also believed in living fully, not just surviving." "I forgot that for a while." The music changed to a waltz, slower and more intimate. Quentin hesitated, then extended his hand again in silent question. When Penelope accepted, he drew her closer than the reel had required, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with gentle firmness. They moved together with surprising ease, finding a natural rhythm. Around them, the festival continued. Children playing with sparklers, neighbors chatting over apple cider, couples dancing. But Penelope was aware only of Quentin's nearness, of the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "People are watching," she murmured, suddenly conscious of their public display. "Let them," he replied simply. As they danced beneath the harvest moon, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too strong to deny, a recognition that the careful distance they'd maintained was crumbling with each step. When the music ended, Quentin reluctantly released her, but remained close. "Penelope," he began, the first time he'd used her given name, "Papa." "Miss Zimmerman." Daisy's voice cut through the moment as she ran toward them, eyes wide with excitement. "They're lighting the big bonfire. Come see." The interruption broke the spell, but the connection remained as they followed Daisy to where the townsfolk gathered around a massive bonfire. Standing beside Quentin in the flickering light, watching his daughter's face glow with happiness, Penelope realized with sudden clarity that her heart was no longer her own. The careful walls she'd built, the belief that she was somehow unworthy of love, all were being steadily dismantled by this man and his daughter, by their inclusion of her in their small family circle, by the frontier community that had accepted her without question or judgment. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was entirely unexpected. 2 weeks after the Harvest Festival, Quentin rode toward town with purpose in his heart and fear in his belly. The small box in his pocket felt impossibly heavy, though its contents weighed almost nothing. He'd spent days crafting the gift, a delicate wooden pendant carved with wildflowers like those that grew along the creek on his property. It wasn't valuable by any conventional measure, but he'd poured his heart into every careful cut of his knife against the pale wood. His intention in giving it to Penelope wasn't merely friendship. The Harvest Festival dance had confirmed what he'd been feeling for weeks, that his heart, which he'd thought permanently closed after Sarah's death, had somehow reopened for this gentle, determined young woman who had brought so much light to Daisy's life and to his own. Quentin had just reached the outskirts of town when a rider approached at a gallop from the opposite direction. "Grayson," the man called, reining his horse to a sudden stop. It was Jenkins, the mayor, his face grim. "Thank God I found you. There's trouble." Cold fear gripped Quentin's heart. "Daisy, she's fine, at school," Jenkins assured him quickly. "It's Quinn's place. Fire in the south pasture. Wind's driving it toward your ranch. Every able man is needed." Without hesitation, Quentin wheeled his horse around. The pendant would have to wait. "I'm on my way." They rode hard, and soon the smoke was visible on the horizon, a thick, dark plume rising against the clear autumn sky. By the time they reached the Quinn property, the fire had already consumed 20 acres and was spreading fast, driven by a sudden western wind. Men from surrounding ranches formed a line, using wet blankets and shovels to beat back the flames where they could, digging fire breaks where they couldn't. Quentin threw himself into the effort, working alongside neighbors to protect not just his own land but the community's livelihood. Hours passed in smoke and heat and desperate labor. The fire jumped one firebreak, then another. Just when it seemed they might lose control entirely, the wind shifted, driving the flames back toward already burned ground. By sunset, they had the fire contained, though small pockets still burned across the blackened landscape. Quentin, exhausted and smoke-stained, surveyed the damage. Quinn had lost most of his southern grazing land. The fire had stopped short of Quentin's property, but only just. The fence line was scorched, and the creek that marked his eastern boundary had helped form a natural firebreak. "You should go to town," Jenkins said, approaching with a water canteen. "Let folks know we've got it under control. And check on that girl of yours. School would have let out hours ago." Quentin nodded, suddenly remembering Daisy. She would be worried when he didn't come to collect her as promised. "Miss Zimmerman would have kept her," Jenkins added, reading his concern. "But best go ease their minds." The ride to town seemed endless, his body aching from hours of firefighting. The small box still weighed in his pocket, a reminder of how differently he'd expected this day to unfold. When he reached the schoolhouse, lights still burned in the attached living quarters. He dismounted stiffly and knocked on the door. Penelope opened it immediately, relief washing over her face. "Quentin, thank God. We heard about the fire and were so worried." Behind her, Daisy appeared in a nightgown, her face lighting up at the sight of her father. "Papa!" She rushed into his arms, and he held her tightly, suddenly overwhelmed by how close the fire had come to their home, to everything he cared about. "You're safe," Penelope said, her eyes taking in his smoke-stained clothes and exhausted face. "Come inside. I have water heating and food." The simple domesticity of Penelope's quarters, the kettle steaming on the stove, the smell of fresh bread, the neat stack of books by her reading chair, struck Quentin with unexpected force. This was what he'd been missing, what Daisy had been missing, not just a mother or a wife, but the sense of completeness that came with family. Penelope insisted on washing the soot from his hands and face herself, her touch gentle as she cleaned a small burn on his forearm. "The fire's contained," he told them as they sat at her small table, Daisy pressed against his side despite the lingering smell of smoke. "Didn't reach our place. I was scared," Daisy admitted in a small voice. "But Miss Zimmerman said you were the bravest man in the county and would stop the fire for sure." Penelope blushed at the child's candid repetition of her words. "I said many men were fighting bravely," she corrected gently. "But you meant especially Papa," Daisy insisted with a child's certainty. The moment hung between the adults, full of unspoken emotion. Finally, Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box. "I came to town this morning to give you this," he said, offering it to Penelope. "Before the fire changed my plans." She accepted it with questioning eyes, opening it carefully to reveal the carved wooden pendant on its simple leather cord. "Quentin," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "It's beautiful." "I made it," he explained, suddenly self-conscious. "The flowers are like those by the creek at our ranch." "You made this? For me?" He nodded, watching her face closely. "I'm not a man of many words, Penelope, but I hope, you know what I'm trying to say." She looked from the pendant to his face, her eyes bright with emotion. "I believe I do. Will you put it on her, Papa?" Daisy asked, breaking the charged silence. "Ladies need help with necklaces." With slightly trembling fingers, Quentin fastened the pendant around Penelope's neck. The carved flowers rested just below her throat, pale against her skin. "Perfect," he murmured, his hand lingering near her cheek. Later, as they prepared to leave, Daisy already half asleep against his shoulder, Penelope walked them to the door. "Sunday dinner?" she asked quietly. "After church. We'll be there," he promised. Then, with newfound courage, "Penelope, I came to town today with more than just the pendant in mind. When the time is right, soon, I'd like to speak with you properly. About the future." Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I'll look forward to that conversation very much." Quentin Grayson. November brought the first real cold snap, turning breath to vapor in the morning air and rimming the water troughs with thin ice. Penelope added extra wood to the schoolhouse stove each morning, keeping the room warm for her students despite the chill that crept through the old building's walls. 3 Sundays had passed since the fire, each bringing Quentin and Daisy to her door after church, each deepening the connection between them. Though they had not revisited the conversation Quentin had hinted at, Penelope felt it hovering on the horizon of their relationship, a promise of something more permanent than Sunday dinners and chaperoned walks. The wooden pendant never left her neck, a constant reminder of his feelings and hers. Townspeople had noticed, of course. She'd caught knowing glances from the mothers at school, heard whispers that ceased when she approached. But rather than the cruel gossip she'd feared from her Boston days, the town's interest seemed benevolent, even approving. On this particular Thursday afternoon, as her students filed out, Penelope noticed a rider approaching from the north, not from town, but from the direction of Quentin's ranch. Her heart quickened when she recognized him, unexpected at this hour. "Quentin," she greeted when he dismounted. "Is everything all right?" His expression was unreadable, a mixture of determination and something like nervousness. "Everything's fine. I was hoping you might join me for a ride." "A ride? Now?" She glanced at the darkening sky. "It'll be dusk soon." "I know," he acknowledged. "But there's something I'd like to show you. It won't take long." Curiosity overcame her hesitation. "Let me get my coat." He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. The closeness was startling, his chest warm against her back, his arms around her to hold the reins. They rode in silence at first, heading away from town toward his ranch. "Where's Daisy?" she asked, aware of the impropriety of their situation despite the remoteness of the trail. "With Mrs. Miller and her girls," he replied. "They're making Christmas decorations." The mention of Christmas sent a pang through Penelope. The school term would end in 3 weeks for the holiday break, and she had no family to visit, no home beyond her small quarters attached to the schoolhouse. "Almost there," Quentin said as they crested a small rise. Below them spread a view she hadn't seen before, a meadow beside the creek that ran through Quentin's property, sheltered by cottonwood trees now bare of leaves. But what caught her breath was the small cabin nestled at the meadow's edge, new construction, its fresh-cut logs golden in the late afternoon light. "Quentin, what is this?" she asked as they approached. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. "I've been building it since the fire," he explained, "with help from neighbors." "But why? Your house isn't what I'm showing you." He took her hand, leading her toward the cabin. "This is..." The small structure was simple but sound, with a stone chimney and a covered porch facing the creek. Inside was a single room with a fireplace, empty except for a wooden chest against one wall. "It's lovely," she said, still confused. "But I don't understand." Quentin's expression softened as he turned to face her. "After Sarah died, I built walls around myself and Daisy. Told myself the frontier was no place for happiness, that survival was all we could hope for." He reached for her hands, holding them in his. "Then you came to Willow Creek, and something changed. You showed kindness to my daughter. You brought books and learning and hope." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest as she began to understand. "This cabin," he continued, gesturing around them, "it's a promise. The beginnings of a new house, bigger than my current one, with proper rooms for a family." His voice grew husky. "For our family, if you'll have us." Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes. "Quentin, I love you, Penelope Zimmerman," he said simply. "And if you could find it in your heart to love a rough cowboy and his daughter, to build a life with us here." "Yes," she whispered, cutting off his careful speech. "Yes, Quentin, I already love you both so much." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepening with the emotion they'd held in check for so long. When they finally parted, Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring with a single pearl set in gold. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but it's perfect," she assured him, holding out her trembling hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Penelope felt the last of her protective walls crumble. The belief that had defined her since Boston, that she was somehow unworthy of real love, dissolved in the face of Quentin's steady devotion. "There's one more thing," he said, leading her to the wooden chest. "Open it." Inside lay children's drawings, dozens of them, clearly Daisy's work. Each depicted the three of them together: Quentin, Daisy, and Penelope, standing before a house, riding horses, gathered around a table. "She's been drawing these for weeks," Quentin explained, "keeping them secret. Said she was practicing for when you became her new mama." Fresh tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "Does she know about this?" Quentin smiled. "She helped me choose the spot for the cabin. Said it needed to be where we could see sunsets together." As dusk approached, they stood on the porch of the small cabin, the beginning of their future home, watching the sky turn crimson and gold over the creek. "When?" Penelope asked, nestled against his side. "Christmas Eve," he suggested. "Small ceremony at the church, then home to celebrate with Daisy." "Home," she repeated, testing the word that had lost its meaning in Boston and found it again here, in this unlikely place, with this man and his daughter. They rode back toward town as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring practicalities, announcements to make, arrangements to discuss, a future to plan. But tonight was for this moment, this certainty, this unexpected joy found in the heart of the frontier. Christmas Eve arrived with a dusting of rare Texas snow, transforming Willow Creek into something from a fairy tale. Lanterns glowed in windows, holly and pine boughs decorated doorways, and the small church at the center of town was filled with candlelight and the scent of evergreens. In the schoolteacher's quarters, Penelope stood before her mirror in the wedding dress that the town's women had helped create. A simple gown of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, elegant despite the limited materials available on the frontier. Her blonde hair was arranged in a coronet of small white flowers, and around her neck hung Quentin's carved pendant, hers something old, that represented the beginning of their courtship. A knock at the door announced Mayor Jenkins' wife, who had volunteered to help the bride prepare. "Oh my," the older woman breathed, clasping her hands. "You look absolutely beautiful, my dear. Do you think he'll be pleased?" Penelope asked, suddenly nervous despite her certainty about the step she was taking. Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly. "That man hasn't taken his eyes off you since you arrived in Willow Creek. He'll be speechless." Another knock heralded the arrival of Mrs. Miller and her eldest daughter, bearing a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with white ribbon. "For the bride," Mrs. Miller announced, presenting it with a flourish. "Every detail must be perfect." Penelope accepted the bouquet with gratitude, overwhelmed by the community's embrace of their wedding. When she'd arrived in Willow Creek just 5 months earlier, she'd never imagined finding not just love, but a true home among these frontier families. "It's time," Mrs. Jenkins said, checking the small clock on the shelf. "Your groom awaits." The short walk to the church through the gentle snowfall felt dreamlike. Mayor Jenkins himself escorted her, having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. The entire town had turned out for the ceremony, lining the path with well wishes and smiles. At the church steps, Penelope paused, gathering her courage. Through the open door, she could see the interior lit by dozens of candles, the townspeople filling the pews, and at the altar, Quentin, handsome in a new dark suit, waiting with the minister. Beside him stood Daisy in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair curled and ribboned, clutching a small posy of greenery that mimicked Penelope's bouquet. When the child spotted her, her face lit with a joy so pure it brought tears to Penelope's eyes. The small church organ began to play, and every head turned as Penelope stepped through the doorway. But she saw only Quentin, whose expression transformed from nervous anticipation to awestruck adoration as she walked toward him. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. The minister's words about love and commitment, the exchange of simple gold bands, Quentin's steady voice as he promised to cherish her all the days of his life. But one moment crystallized in Penelope's memory, touching her heart in a way she knew she would never forget. After they had spoken their vows, but before the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin knelt down to Daisy's level, taking the child's small hands in his. "Daisy," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed church, "I'm not the only one making promises today. Do you remember what we talked about?" The girl nodded solemnly, then turned to look up at Penelope with those earnest blue eyes. "Miss Zimmerman," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "will you be my new mama? I promise to love you and help you and be a good daughter forever and ever." A murmur of emotion rippled through the congregation as Penelope knelt in her wedding dress, bringing herself level with the child. "Daisy Grayson," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Nothing in this world would make me happier than to be your mother. I promise to love you, guide you, and cherish you all the days of my life." She opened her arms, and Daisy stepped into them without hesitation. Over the child's shoulder, Penelope met Quentin's gaze, his eyes bright with unshed tears, his face alight with a happiness that matched her own. When they rose, the three of them stood together before the minister, not just a couple being joined, but a family being formed. And when Quentin finally kissed his bride to the cheers of their friends and neighbors, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and warm despite the winter chill outside. Tables groaned with food contributed by every family in the community, roasted meats, preserved fruits, cakes, and pies of every description. The small band played lively tunes for dancing, and the newlyweds were toasted with spiced cider and the mayor's carefully hoarded bottles of champagne. Throughout the evening, Penelope found herself watching Quentin with their daughter. The gentle way he guided Daisy through a simple dance, his patient answers to her endless questions, the love evident in every interaction. This was the man she had married, not just the strong, capable rancher, but the devoted father whose heart had enough love for both his child and his new wife. As midnight approached, they prepared to leave for their wedding night, to be spent in the cabin Quentin had been building, now furnished simply but comfortably for their first days as husband and wife. Daisy would stay with the Millers until Christmas morning, when they would collect her to begin their first day as a complete family. The townspeople gathered outside to bid them farewell, tossing handfuls of wheat for prosperity as they mounted the decorated wagon that would take them to their new home. "Ready, Mrs. Grayson?" Quentin asked, his voice warm with promise as he helped her onto the seat beside him. "Ready, Mr. Grayson," she replied, feeling the rightness of her new name, her new life. They drove through the gentle snowfall, following lanterns Quentin had placed earlier to mark the path. When they reached the cabin, its windows glowing with welcoming light, he stopped the wagon and turned to her. "I've dreamed of bringing you home as my wife," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Of building a life here, watching our family grow, growing old together on this land. Dreams that will come true," she assured him, reaching to touch his face. "All of them." He kissed her then, without the restraint propriety had demanded before, a kiss that spoke of passion and promise and a future stretching endlessly before them. When they finally parted, breathless, he surprised her by lifting her into his arms. "Threshold tradition," he explained with a smile, carrying her toward their cabin door. Inside, the fireplace cast a warm glow across the simple furnishings, a bed with a handmade quilt, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding books, and the small treasures that would make this space their own. Branches of pine decorated the mantel, filling the air with their fresh scent. "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the care with which he had prepared their wedding night home. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, the firelight painting shadows across their skin, Penelope marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the drawing rooms of Boston to a frontier cabin, from believing herself unworthy of love to being cherished so completely. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to find this," she admitted. "When I came west, I was running away from my past, not toward a future. I believed the frontier would be just another place to hide, to survive. And now," she raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes, "now I understand that the frontier isn't just about survival. It's about building something meaningful despite the hardships. It's about finding home in unexpected places or unexpected people. His smile in the firelight made her heart turn over. When Sarah died, I stopped believing in second chances, he confessed. Thought the best I could do was keep Daisy safe, teach her to be strong. I never imagined finding love again, or that my daughter would find a mother who loves her as if she were her own. She is my own, Penelope said with simple certainty. From the moment she asked if I would be her new mama, my heart was hers. Quentin pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. And mine has been yours since you knelt beside her in Thornton's store, picking up those cans without a thought to your fine dress or Eastern manners. They fell silent, listening to the crackle of the fire and the occasional soft ping of snow against the windows. Outside, the Texas winter worked its rare magic on the landscape. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Penelope and Quentin Grayson found the warmth and belonging they had both stopped believing was possible. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the snow glittering like diamonds in the early light. They collected Daisy from the miller's home, her excitement at the holiday matched only by her joy at finally being able to call Penelope Mama without hesitation. At the ranch, their ranch, they exchanged simple gifts. A hand-carved wooden horse from Quentin to Daisy, new books Penelope had ordered from back east, warm knitted items she had made during quiet evenings. But the greatest gift was unspoken, the family they had formed together, against all expectations. As Daisy explored her presence by the fire, Quentin pulled Penelope to the window, pointing to the horizon where their new home was taking shape. By spring, he promised, we'll have the main house finished. More rooms for our growing family. The hint of future children hung in the air between them, a hope neither had dared express until now. I'd like that, Penelope said softly. Very much. Outside, the Texas frontier stretched before them, challenging, unpredictable, sometimes harsh. But as Quentin's arm encircled her waist and Daisy's laughter filled their home, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came together. The false beliefs that had shaped their lives, his, that the frontier allowed no room for happiness, hers, that she was somehow unworthy of true love, had been transformed by the truth they had discovered in each other's arms. That home wasn't a place but a feeling, that family could be chosen as well as born, and that love, once found, could withstand any hardship the frontier might impose. As Quentin turned her toward him for a Christmas morning kiss, Daisy's delighted giggle in the background, Penelope gave thanks for the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment, and for the cowboy and his daughter who had asked her to be part of their family, changing all their lives forever.